all get something that jumps up on your screen saying you give consent to be recorded? Yeah. It's actually clever. For us, a new thing with Zoom. They want everyone just to, realise. But I mean, there's always been a recording sign at the top. But hopefully, you'll give me consent. Otherwise, you've got to leave. It's only because of people that can't make it. Doreen, what's for dinner? What are you making?
Fish and chips.
Let's make a start. Maybe a couple of people will come in a minute. We can have an intimate conversation. I know I'm competing with real world life out there, but I appreciate everyone that wants to come and engage in it. Really, I think it's a really interesting conversation. I'll be honest with you. This isn't something I knew very much about at all before preparing for this. But let's go back to basics. I've called this using a lift on Shabbat or not. So let me ask you, and it's clearly not going to be simple. There's clearly issues, right? What are we talking about and what are we not talking about? We're not talking about walking into a lift on Shabbat, pressing a button and going to the right floor, right? We're not talking about that because according to all opinions, unless your leg is falling off and you can't walk up the stairs, in which case you should be in an ambulance or a hospital, not in a lift. We're not talking about that. Everyone just mute for a minute and then it's just, we can have your little conversations and stuff. Perfect. So we're not talking about that. But could anyone argue for or against the case of standing in a busy hallway on Shabbat in a hotel, let's say in the middle of wherever, Manhattan, and waiting around and all of a sudden you're staying on the 15th floor. Can I get into the lift and be in the lift? Anyone have any thoughts? It's obviously not simple, that's for sure. Well, anyone got any initial thoughts? How do you feel about that?
People might think that you've pressed for the lift. It's like that perception of people that people have.
Excellent. So is this a case of Maris Iron, which we call it, right? That's what Barbara's saying. Maris Iron, which means it looks like I've done something wrong. It looks like I've done a malaka. It looks like I'm in the lift and I could have pressed the button. Okay, good. Anyone else? What else could be the issues? Anthony, did you unmute?
Me? Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I was just thinking of the good evening, everyone. Opposite of that, because in our block of flats in Israel, we have a Shabbat lift. And also, if you go to stay in a hotel, you can ask staff to assist you.
Prior to Shabbos, though.
You can arrange it and ask for them to assist you at various points during Shabbat.
You can't ask Shabbat.
Are you asking or telling?
I'm saying that the opposite of what the previous person said about it could be thought that you as a person press the buttons, that there are other ways of using a lift whereby other people wouldn't know whether or not you had pressed buttons, but which are permitted, as in the fact that our block of flats has a specific Shabbat lift, because it stops at every floor so people can get in and out, regard, whether they will, it will stop at every floor regardless of who is in the lift or what floor you personally want. And also, if you're staying in a hotel, and Anthony's laughing at me now.
Sorry, Rabbi.
No, it's okay, because I think you made a really good point, because on the one hand, Barbara quite rightly said it could look like you're in there pressing buttons, or it looks wrong. On the other hand, this is saying there are many circumstances where it could be very permissible for you to be in there, and therefore it could be the opposite of it looking wrong. It could just be assumed that you haven't done anything wrong. I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So, Doreen, is that are you waving or?
Yeah, I'm waving my paw. Yes, I was going to say that whenever we've been away and it's been Shabbat, the hotels that we've stayed in, especially in Israel, the Dan Panorama in Tel Aviv, they have automatic lifts. It just opens and you can just walk in and out. I'm not sure.
It's a Shabbos lift.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, yeah.
So I should probably put a little disclaimer out. You might not like what I come out with at the end of this, but just because we're having, don't worry, Anthony, don't stress. We can always take anything offline if you want to talk about things further. It's not all doom and gloom. It's just really interesting what we're going to go through, and there's lots to rely on as well. So I'm not dealing with a Shabbat lift. I will come back to a Shabbat lift at the very, 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 very end, because Shabbat lifts are simple and not simple, but that's not the topic now. The topic is now, and we're not dealing with Shabbat lift. The Shabbat lift, as we said, is a lift. Well, actually, no, I'll explain what Shabbat lift is, even though you probably know that will do at the end. The only time in recent memory that I've used a lift on Shabbat personally was when Lisa was in labour with Rachel. If you've ever been into Shari Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem, it's got a lot of floors, a bit like some, Norfolk Park, Royal Free, 12, 13 floors, whatever it is. And they, the Shari Tzedek offered, like Hadassah did as well. I don't know if the hospitals do it here. I'm sure they do. A pre-birthing tour of the hospital, so you can go along and you meet, and they give you a tour of the hospital. This is the maternity ward. This is where you're going to give birth. This is that. This is the labour room. This is the waiting room. This is where the husband's pass out. Whatever it is. I couldn't make it when Lisa went. We had a thing. I can't remember what happened. I couldn't go. So Lisa went. I don't mind saying, and she probably doesn't mind saying, she hasn't got the best sense of direction, and especially when she's in labour. So we get to the Shari Tzedek Hospital at 6:30 a.m. on Shabbat morning, 2 days before Shavuot, 13 years ago, and we get into the Cheder Miyun, so that's the A&E part. And I said, right, where's the birthing ward? She's like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, you were here 2 months ago. You had a tour. Where was it? I can't remember. So we're traipsing. There's no one in the hospital at 6:30 in the morning. Like, what upper floor with that? And eventually I saw a sign on the 9th floor. We're on -2 or something ridiculous. So I said, right, let's walk up the stairs. And she looked at me like, no. Not walk up. So, okay, fine. You get the lift. I'll meet you up there. And she went, no, you are coming with me now. So that was the last time I think I went in the lift on Shabbat. But let's explain some of the reasoning, some of the rationale. You've mentioned a couple of issues. Can you think any other issues? Anything else? If anything you might have heard of about using a lift, what could be? Okay, I'll ask you a different question. I'm standing in that lobby. It's not a Shabbat lift. It is Shabbat, and I now want to stand in that lift. Can I go in? Can I go into that lift and use it on Shabbat? Give me a good reason, either yes or a good reason, either no. Barbara's already given me one. Liz has come back and said, well, that might have been an issue, but any other good or bad or pro or against, negative, whatever it is. Caroline. Oh, go on, Anthony, go on.
I think on the situation regarding using the lift on Shabbat and having to press the button, in your circumstances, it's like having to drive to the hospital. You can drive to the hospital, but you have to leave the car there because on Shabbat you're not allowed to drive home again. And I think it'll be the same with lift. You could ride up it because obviously under the circumstances, but you won't be able to go back down on the lift.
Okay, I'm not dealing with Pekuach Nefesh. I'm dealing with some. I want to use a lift. I'm staying 12 floors up, and I want to use the lift.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
Okay. We'll use the example of our Israeli block of flats again, because it has 2 lifts, one of which has a special Shabbat mode, which is only turned on for Shabbat and Yom Tov, and the other lift which hasn't. And those of us who are Shomrei know that you don't set foot in the regular lift on Shabbat and Yom Tov. You only use. It's to do with pressing buttons and having to ask people to do things for you if it's not necessarily going where you want to, whereas the other lift has been preset before Shabbat specifically for use on Shabbat.
Okay.
Okay, good. Said that we frequently use the stairs.
Okay. What floor do you? I went off for you. Caroline, go for it. What do you think?
Well, so a bit partial. First thing, partially similar to Liz. First of all, the lift may not stop at the floor you want to go to. You're in this lift. And second, and you may end up being in the lift on your own suddenly if everybody else gets out at floor 1 or 2. And also, it may end up that everybody goes in the lift being in the same situation as you. and then you're all, nobody's going to be, you're then in with a bit of a problem.
Okay, all good points. So here's some of the issues. Now I haven't actually prepared a source sheet. I'm actually probably not. I'm going to put it in the chat in case anyone is desperate to look through some of these sources. Boom. It should have gone. You don't. I'm not going to share my screen. You really don't need to look at it. There are some really complicated things going on underneath all of this, none of which you've raised, which is great. So we're going to learn it together. We're going to understand it together. 2 disclaimers and then 1 baseline point. First disclaimer, I don't know very much about electricity. And this is not going to be a show about electricity or electricity on Shabbat. All right, I know there's atoms and protons and neutrons and electrons, whatever there might be, and they all move around and circuits and stuff. We're not really dealing with that, but it exists, and therefore we have to know about it. And I also don't know very much about lifts. You don't pay me to know anything about lifts. Yeah, you pay me to be a rabbi. But I have learned quite a bit about lifts in the last 2 days and how they work. So anything I say tonight that is somewhat technical, which is not very much, I'm saying, just honestly, that this is not an area that I know a lot about. I'm more interested in what halachic sources say on this topic. But if you've got questions, I will try and answer them. I just wanted to let you know I'm in no way an expert on this topic. That's the first thing. And the second thing I want to say is we are not dealing with a case about pressing buttons, because everyone would agree you can't press a button, right? Everyone would know and appreciate and understand that. We're dealing with a case where A, you definitely don't press the button, and B, you specifically cannot ask a person to press a button for you, because that's exactly like walking into a room and saying, please turn this light switch on for me. Please press floor number 7. Can't do that, right? So we're not talking about that. We're simply talking about a case where you're getting into a lift and you're just benefiting from the fact it's going to go up or down, maybe, and you're going to get out where you get out. If you live on the 17th floor and you get into that lift hoping that someone is going to take you at least 1 floor higher, that's going to save you a little bit of breathlessness on Shabbat. Okay, so yeah, or you're going to go higher and walk down, whatever it might be. So let's start with the strict opinions. That's how we're going to start. And again, you can't leave early, because if you leave early, you're not going to see the full picture. So don't assume because I'm saying this is how we're going to end up. Strict opinions. There's 2 basic understandings of why people, and this isn't going back that far, because I can't remember, I did look it up when lifts were invented. It wasn't that long ago. So we haven't got like the Shulchan Aruch telling us about lifts. We've got to apply what they've written before. So 2 earlier strict understandings of why you just can't get in. Number 1, there is a Gemara, or it's a Mishnah really in the Gemara, that talks about activities that are weekday activities that you shouldn't do on Shabbat. An example that gives over there, which is drawn out, is a particular kind of chair, which is carried on poles. And in that situation, it shouldn't be done on Shabbat. So you shouldn't, forget an Erev, you shouldn't sit in a chair. It's called sedan, I think, or that car. But I can't remember what the Mishnah uses. It's a type of chair that you use poles and you'll carry. You shouldn't use that on Shabbat. Why? Rashi explains, because that is a activity that is done during the week and it wouldn't be appropriate to do on Shabbat. And there are those that say when it comes to a lift, that's talking about going horizontally. A lift is talking about vertically. It's being carried by someone or something else. Not appropriate for Shabbat use. That's a strict opinion which pretty much no one accepts. But that's an opinion out there. Another strict opinion was a little bit more accepted, and this is something that no one mentioned that I thought was interesting because I wasn't sure what people knew and understood. And this is the one thing that I did know coming into this, is there is an opinion out there that has an issue when it comes to the currents and the electronics and the pressure and the mode of electricity of how the lift works. So how does a lift work, in short, from my brief research? Please correct me if someone knows differently. You have a box or a cabin with 2 different types, mainly with a wire going up, with a motor at the top, and on the other side it loops down, and you have weights. So it balances, right? So the more people that get in the lift, the harder it has to work. The heavier the lift, the more the weights and the motor has to work, get the weights to balance the lift. So the lift wants to go up, the weights go down, and the lift goes up, the weights go up. So it works like that. I know that doesn't make any sense, but it should. You get the idea. You can go on YouTube and watch videos. That's what I did. It makes sense, right? Sort of. Now, if you get into that lift, anyone, doesn't matter how heavy or how light you are adding to the weight of that lift. That's why you have on the side of lifts maximum 14 people, maximum 8 people, or in some buildings maximum 3 people. If you've got a really old building, maximum 1 person, right? Whatever it is, a maximum weight. Why? What's the reason? Not just because the cable and the motors, because the weights that counterbalance the lift are only set to a certain weight, and therefore they can't balance the lift if it's heavier than that. You, me, anyone being in that lift potentially adds or increases to the current. I think it is. It's the current. It's the current officially. It has to work harder, and you're causing it to work harder, and therefore you shouldn't get in it. Does that make sense? A little bit, right? You can't cause a current or electricity to work harder on Shabbat, and you being in that lift is a problem. Now, just gonna check everyone's on mute, just because I get very easily distracted, as you probably know. They're the stricter opinions. The chair being carried looks like a weekday activity, and we don't do weekday activities as much as we can on Shabbat. That's opinion number one, pretty much rejected. No one really follows that. Opinion number two, which is a little bit more worrying for us, is this idea of me actually affecting how hard the equipment works. So therefore, I am actually involved in the workings of this on Shabbat, unlike being in a room with a light on. If I'm sitting in a room and a light comes on, I benefit from that, but the light isn't working harder because I'm in the room. Just okay, let's leave that to the side. Let's jump to the lenient side of things. Okay, those that discuss the lenient side of things want to discuss, there's a few issues. One of them is, this is the Shulchan Aruch, right? So this is Rav Yosef Karo, so obviously he's not talking about lift, he's talking about a concept. What's he talking about? He brings a Gemara in Shabbat. The Gemara is a dispute between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Again, I've got all these sources, but I've decided we're going to get bogged down in the sources and I want to stick to lists. But just so we understand, because there's a source here, I'll explain it. Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai have a dispute. And it comes out, the Shulchan Aruch person's like, he follows the ruling of Beit Hillel. And what does Hillel say? They say that a person can set up their kelim, their vessels, their utensils, whatever it might be, to work before Shabbat on Shabbat. Meaning, and let's just take very simple, not necessarily this, but just to make it easy, a time switch. I can set up a time switch on Shabbat for my lights, or for the hot plate, or for whatever it might be, or to set up a program to record. I can do that on Friday, Erev Shabbat, before Shabbat. Even though that item is going to work for me on Shabbat, but I have no interaction or engagement with that device myself on Shabbat. So if I set it up before Shabbat, my utensils, my vessels can work on Shabbat, even though I'm not directly interacting with them. They want to take this, the Shulchan Aruch, and this is Rav Moshe Feinstein, of blessed memory, Zecher Tzaddik V'Kivracha, Rav Moshe Feinstein, who is one of the great poskim, halakhic authorities in the previous century in America. He wants to use this Shulchan Aruch to understand lifts, and he says the lift should be okay, because the lift potentially is running regardless of your interaction with it. Yes, you might argue it's working a bit harder, but that could also be overlooked. Why? Because a current working harder isn't necessarily a problem for us. And how's a good example of this? Hearing aids. How does a hearing aid work? Okay, we're not going to go too much into hearing aids now. Why is it permissible? When I talk to someone on Shabbat who is wearing a hearing aid, essentially it's on, it's a current that's working, and when I'm talking to that person, especially if I'm standing close and I'm shouting, or standing further away and I'm shouting, whatever it might be, in some way I'm interacting, that current has to work harder, the device has to work harder. So why is it that I'm allowed to talk to someone wearing a hearing aid on Shabbat? And the reason is because I didn't start the thing. The fact that it has to work a bit harder, okay, but that's not me. I'm not actually causing it to start or stop, and therefore it's permitted. Same with the lift. I'm not specifically causing it to start or stop. The fact the motor is on before I get in the lift, it's not working at that moment, but I'm not causing it to start or stop. I'm just allowing it to increase in its intensity, its current. It's working a bit harder. That's not specifically on me. So we've got two sides of the argument. We've got the stricter side of things that wants to just say, no, it's not for us. Either it looks like a non-Shabbat idea, it's not the right thing to do. We don't do these types of things on Shabbat. Or the fact the current is working harder. On the opposite side of things, we're not worrying about the current working harder, and it's been set up to go before Shabbat or not for me on Shabbat, and therefore we are not so worrying about it. There is another reason why they want to allow it, right? And that's the issue of grammar. Grammar on Shabbat, not grammar. Some of you like grammar, not grammar. Grammar from the Hebrew word gorem. Gorem means to cause something to happen. Grammar on Shabbat is allowed. What do I mean? Let's take the Gemara and explain this. It's a little bit graphic. I apologize, but it does prove a point. Listen to this. I hope you're sitting down, haven't recently eaten. Someone wants to kill someone else. Okay, it's not a nice thing. It happens. And I'm just going to actually read the mission to you. You're going to have to look it up just so I can get it right. The Hedron says as follows. Amarara. Okay. Amaraba, kafle umes bara'av. Someone is tied up and starved to death. Is the person that tied that person up responsible and therefore punished or not? What's the question? What killed the person? The tying up or the starvation? So what would we say? What would you say?
Isn't there a smell dispenser?
Okay, you're not talking to me. Anyone? Anyone to the wake up room? Anyone, would you say? Huh? Go for it, Dorian.
I'd have said it's a bit like the chicken and the egg. Which caused which? Did they die because they starved, or did they starve to death, because they died?
If they hadn't been tied up, they wouldn't have starved to death.
Oh, okay. So that was what I would think as well.
And she got life in prison.
What?
It was on the news today. A woman got life in prison for starving the person who employed her to death.
Oh,
and forced the will to get money out of them.
I think I briefly saw something like that. I was too busy reading about vaccinations and lockdowns. But yeah, thanks for that. So in English law, the other example that the Gemara gives, it says if you tie someone up in the desert during the day and the sun is beating down on them and they dehydrate and die, you've caused that death. If you do it at night, you're exempt. Now, by the way, when I say exempt, you are most certainly in the wrong. What the Gemara says is you're exempt from punishment in this world. God's got you worried about in Bet Din Shal Mana, right? The Bet Din, God's gonna punish you, right? So don't think you're not getting out punishment. But what the Gemara is trying to understand is if an action is direct or indirect, and then if it's indirect, how do we look at it? So I'll give you another example. You want to someone ties someone else up in a train track, knowing that train is going to come and hit. The moment that they tie them up, the trains are closed, nothing's happening, nothing's there. Right? The fact that the train's going to come tomorrow, it's nothing to do with him there. The train isn't currently running on the track. Or the sun. If you tie that person up at night and the sun kills him tomorrow, the moment that you tied that person up, the sun isn't there. Therefore, your actions, even though becomes the cause, is not a direct action. That makes sense a little bit? You holding? Anyone? Yeah, it makes a little bit of sense. You might not like it, by the way. I'm not saying you have to like it, but that's the Gemara. This is the concept of grammar, right? And grammar on Shabbat is permitted. Again, not to be taken without, but much better and much more detailed understanding. But just a general principle concept. If I don't do something directly, it can be at least rabbinically permitted. Or at least from the Torah, it's permitted. Meaning, when I get into that lift on Shabbat, the motor is running. It's not working at the moment, it's running. But at that moment, it's not moving. And therefore, me being in there, I'm not causing something to happen directly. Only after the fact. Barbara, you don't look convinced. I can see your face. You don't look convinced. I'm just taking you through some of the issues, right? Trust me, you want to rely on grammar to be able to get into a lift on Shabbat, even a Shabbat lift, and I'll get there in a few minutes. Right? So we use this concept of grammar. Use the fact it's not a direct, this is how, I don't know if you've ever seen those Shabbat scooters. Have you seen any Shabbat scooters? They're proper mobility scooters. I had a few knocking around when I was in Norris Lee, some of the older gentlemen that wanted to come to shul. So you can go to certain places, Somet and the Halacha Institute of Technology, or Technology is whatever it's called, and they make these scooters that you're pressing buttons and you're turning a key.
Your tips are better than mine.
And it looks like you're driving this thing in all the very worst ways, right? But they're made to work on Shabbat, specifically for Shabbat, because they rely on the circuit. So when you press a button, there's no direct cause. It all delays, all the circuits are delayed. Let's not get too far bogged down all the details now. So, by the way, just so you really understand grammar on Shabbat, the Shulchan Aruch Paskins this from that Gemara, and he says, the best way of explaining it is, can you put out a fire on Shabbat? Really? No, you shouldn't put out a fire on Shabbat. Because it's a malacha, a risk of life and death. Okay, we'll sort this out. Let's just say it's not a risk of life or death, but there's a fire. Somewhere you see a chest of tools, that's what the Rabbah says. See a chest of tools on fire. can you put out that fire? Not directly. What should you do? You should take buckets of water and place them around the fire. So when the fire hits those buckets, the water will put them out. So that's not a direct action. You place them down. At that moment, the fire is not there. When the fire comes, even though the fact that you've done an action that will lead to them going out, it's not a direct action, and therefore that's permitted. I'm just trying to show you what the ideas are. So we have all the reasons to be lenient, that it's not a direct action, that the currents increase, but that's not a problem. We have all the reasons to be strict, as we already explained. How do we pass in? There's a third opinion. Okay, there's always, right, however many Jews, however many opinions. Third opinion. This opinion is by Rav Levi Yitzhak Halpern. And Rav Halpern is the director of the Institute for Science and Halacha in Jerusalem. Rav Halpern spent 16 years of his life researching lifts, how they work, and their use on Shabbat. Now, I know what you're thinking. You wish he was giving this share now. I also do, by the way, because he'd be able to answer all your questions and explain it in a much better way than me. You weren't thinking that. You're thinking 16 years. It's quite impressive. He went literally all over the world trying to understand the mechanisms, the nuances, how the lifts work, why they work, when they work, what makes them work, the different devices. He spoke to all the leading halachic authorities around the world about all the different issues of bayot and everything. He writes a thesis. It's called the Ma'aliyot B'Shabbat, lifts on Shabbat, or lifts for Shabbat. And then he goes through all the issues at great length. And he comes up with a somewhat middle opinion. You're going to love it, right? His expert opinion is as follows. A person may ascend in a lift, but not descend. One more time. He says, a person may go up in a lift, but not down in a lift. Why, you ask? Why? You have to ask him. Now, he goes through it, and he will explain it. But simply put, the mechanisms of how it works going up and the extra weight that you would have in there makes it out that the motor and the energy that's used works in a different way, going up and going down. From all his research, going down, he said, that brings a lot more problems. Going up, what's doing all the work? He said it's the weight on the other side. The weight going down pushes the lift up, the cabin up, right? When it goes the other way down, the cabin is now doing all the work and the weights are just coming back up. So all the work, all the hard work is actually being done when the lift is going down. And he says that causes many, many more problems on Shabbat. And I'll quote you from his writings. He says, the weight of the passengers riding on the elevator assists the elevator's motors in the descent of the elevator. And he says if the passenger is responsible for the descent, i.e. you getting in there and you have increased the work that the descent is created in the descent, that person is responsible also for illuminating the various lamps, connecting the door motor, the brakes, and numerous other electric circuits which are activated during the descent. We know that lights have flashing light, lifts have lights and buzzers and circuits and boards and this and hello, welcome to floor 12, or whatever it might be, right? So Rav Halpern wants to suggest in his great wisdom and genuine halachic wisdom and understanding that you can go up, but you can't go down. And if we all want to stress about that for a moment, it's actually the way you'd like it. If you had a choice, right? Because if you've got to get up the 12th floor and you're allowed to get in the lift, so I'll have a bracha, bracha Hashem. But if you've got walking down, okay, we can all manage down a bit easier. We can walk up in general. Okay, so they're the main opinions. Now there are two other issues that's worth mentioning before we get to how we paskin rabbi, right? And what about Shabbos? There are two other issues worth mentioning. They're connected. One is the idea of performing a malacha, an action, a creative action that would have happened even without me. That lift is going up or down, regardless of me in it. I'm not causing it to go up. I haven't asked for it to go up. I'm benefiting it from going up. I'm benefiting from it going up or down, but it's happening regardless. And if you look through those nuances in halacha, a lot of the times it comes out from the two. There are many examples. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, and I knew when I write my notes, I don't need to give an example because I was thinking one on the spot. Clearly, I haven't put one on the spot. It's nuanced, but there's an idea that if you write over letters that are already formed, it's not considered writing because you haven't done the thing. So it's that kind of thing. If you do something that there's no obvious sign that you have done it, then it's permitted. The best way of explaining is we're not allowed to do a creative act on Shabbat. That's a malacha, a creative act, accomplishing something to produce something new. That's what a malacha is. So if it already exists, if it's already there, and I'm still doing it, but it's not recognizable that I'm doing it, and there's no real action from it, it's permitted. I'm getting in that lift. What's happening? The lift's going up and down. Forget all the technical stuff we discussed. Practically speaking, what's the malacha? What's the malacha behind it? Yes, the circuit might be working a bit harder. It's happening anyway. I haven't caused it to happen. So there are those that will say there's no actual malacha when it comes to going in a lift. That's one thing. And the other thing is a bit similar. It's called Messiah ein by mamash. What have you actually done? It's like the opposite. What have you done? You being in that lift, you're not really achieving anything other than you're getting up and down. So you benefited, but you're not actually doing a malacha. You're not actually doing anything. You're passive in something and not active in something. So you put all of these things together, and that's where a lot of these halakhic issues come from. I've done a lot, genuinely a lot, and it's so much more complicated than I'm bringing to you, but there's only so much you can achieve in this format, in this forum, without going through each one individually to really go through it, and it will take a lot of explanation. However, halakha l'maaseh, practical halakha, based on everything I've said, again, we're not talking about Shabbat lifts, we're talking about general lifts that one could benefit from on Shabbat. There is always what to say you should never get in one, and always what to say that you could always get in one, based on everything I've said. But most halakhic authorities today will tell you, unless there's a great need, you should avoid it. If you need, then it's much better to go up than it is to go down. But most authorities say going down is a problem, again, because of how it's working. There's always what to lean on, and in the case of, God forbid, an emergency, or nefesh, or whatever it might be, you know, you can do much more than using a lift. That's the least of your worries. There's really no life, God forbid, life threatening. So that's halakha l'maaseh. So before I talk about Shabbos lifts and another topic, any questions on what I've said? Does it make sense? You want to argue with me? No? Throw something at the screen? It's okay. And it's fascinating stuff. Huh? So let's talk about Shabbat. No, Shabbat lifts. Based on everything I've said, let me ask you this question. You're stuck in Hong Kong. I've never been to Hong Kong, but my understanding is in Hong Kong, they use not lifts to get everywhere, they use a lot of escalators to get everywhere. Yeah. Is an escalator permitted on Shabbat, based on everything we said?
It's a moving staircase, it never stops.
No.
You're not asking it to go. Nobody has to press it.
Did you unmute? Viv, can you hear me? You are muted. Sorry, I thought you wanted to say something.
Sorry, I think that based on that you should be able to use a lift, an escalator. But I was also wondering if, say, a horse and cart was going by, could you jump on the back on the same principle if it's going anyway along the road? Is that not the similar thing? Is that a similar thing?
Again, a horse and cart is somewhat different because there's different ways when it comes to traveling. A and B, we're worried about things like going out of an Erev and a Tchum and all these things. But one could argue the principle, let's just say it was in the Shul car park, right? There's a problem with the horse and cart because that could be similar to a bicycle where you might come and fix it if the wheel falls off.
Right,
I don't know about that example specifically, but let's just say
might be a parallel, but I can see.
I can see how that could be a similar idea. Yeah, but so you think an escalator should be allowed on Shabbat?
Yeah,
right.
But
you can go to Brent Cross and
not Brent Cross because there's other
it's a different issue of Brent Cross. I meant into Anthony or Liz.
I think it's very, very, with an escalator, it's constantly going. It doesn't stop. Okay, your weight, I don't think makes any difference. It won't decrease, pick up speed. There are some that actually slow down, and when you get on it, will speed up. But the majority of them, they're constantly going at the same speed, regardless of whether you're on it or you're not on it. So,
based on what we said, it doesn't have the problems. Right? What are the problems of one of the problems with the lift, those that had issues with it said that it's working harder. So an escalator isn't working harder. And there's no buttons to press, right? So there's no worry. So my understanding is, Mi'ikara din, an escalator could be permissible on Shabbat.
But there are some.
It feels wrong.
But there are some escalators, Rabbi. There are some escalators that actually do slow down when there's nobody on it and go at a much slower speed. And so you get on, they speed. So that would be contentious, wouldn't it?
100%. Yeah, avoid those at all costs.
Yeah.
What about a
Even not on
travelator?
Shabbat,
Sorry,
Hey, go on.
a travelator. You know those travelators. You get. I know you should. If, say you were at an airport, you wouldn't be on Shabbat, but should you? Or you were somewhere with a travelator. Should you avoid it, or could you just step
Or
on it?
Tesco's going up. That travelator that goes up. That's so cool. And the trolley pictures on the kids. That is a day trip. For any of you that want to take your grandkids anywhere, Tesco's and Bournemouth, hours of fun. And that's just for me, forget the kids. Yeah, same thing as an escalator, right? If it's good that Anthony raised that point because you're right, there are those that will speed up, slow down, switch off. For example, they're sensor based, I imagine they would be more of a problem. But if it's one of the old-fashioned ones that literally just runs until it stops and it doesn't work any harder or less hard depending on who's on there, in my mind, based on my understanding, that will be permissible. So let's sort of head towards the end now, or conclude with Shabbat lifts. So we've already heard about one Shabbat lift in a building. This is where we have to be a little bit where you might not like me. So not all Shabbat lifts are created equally. Based on what I've said, some of the issues are, Anthony's turned his microphone off so he's not to swear, right? Based on what I've said, what could some of the issues be with a Shabbat lift? Let's be honest. A Shabbat lift is a lift. Well, again, I don't want to give the game away. Anthony, unmute yourself. I'm not picking on you. Just your Shabbat lift. Liz explained how your Shabbat lift works. How you think your Shabbat lift works. It might not work this way. You think it stops on pre-designated floors, regardless, and runs on a cycle, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
It goes right to the top and then it stops on its way down every floor. So it
Right.
just does one run right to the very top of the building and then it stops every floor going down.
Right. Some buildings where there's like less sort of religious people, or you just book in and you pay the vad by it for it to stop on your floor. You know what I mean? So some building, if you've got like a 17-rise building in your Yamim, for example, and you're on floor 7, then you'll have to pay for it to stop on your floor either way. But okay, but based on what we said, could there be any other issues or not? Okay. So this is why I said, Doreen wants to say, go on, go for it, Doreen.
Somebody might get in the lift and not realise what it is and start pressing the buttons.
Oh, good point. To my knowledge, aside from the emergency and the alarm buttons, they're all disabled. You can't.
But they don't know that, maybe.
It doesn't matter. You can't. You could press floor 12 as much as you like.
Yeah.
But, Mashiach will come quicker than getting that.
And then if it doesn't do it, they can ring the alarm bell and say something's wrong with the lift. It's not stopping at the floor.
Someone would probably shout at them.
Oh, okay.
But you're right. But most hotels or blocks that have them, it's a Shabbat lift because it's got that.
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. There's a recording. You go back and watch it.
Yeah.
They have that annoying. Anthony, you must have one in your building. It must do the beat.
Yeah.
The
Beeps
buzzer.
every.
Yes.
Yeah.
You hear it coming. You know you're nearly there when you can hear it coming.
Yeah.
And that is because it's another issue because all lifts have sensors, so you don't get crushed in the doors. So that is to tell you, quick, get in, because I imagine, I've never tested it because if I've ever had the opportunity to be anywhere near a Shabbat lift, I haven't used it, and I definitely haven't tried this, but the sensors aren't deactivated, meaning if it's a Shabbat lift and you're standing in the middle of those doors, the sensor will be activated, which means you will have caused the doors to open. in theory, that's also precautionary risk. You're going to be crushed by, electric doors, big heavy ones. However, the beeping is there to tell you the door's about to shut, so get out of the way. Okay, but the issues of the Shabbat lifts, if it's not calibrated in a particular way, are that it's not just about the buttons, it's about the weight and about the fact that the mechanics behind it aren't necessarily working in a way in which is permissible on Shabbat. By the fact that it's only stopping on floors that it's designated to stop at, so no one's pushing any buttons, and the fact that it's just working on a continuous cycle only gets you around half the problems. It doesn't get you around the problems of the fact that there's a problem, the fact that Rob Halpin spent 16 years looking, the fact that you can't go down in a lift because of the weight systems and the motor, and that affects how the mechanism works and the motor works and the current going around it, and therefore you haven't helped potentially with that part of the problem. Now, that's why I said not all Shabbat lifts are created equally. There are some Shabbat lifts that are created, as Liz explained before, that their sole function in life is to have the Shabbat setting that it will simply stop on every floor that it's designated to stop at and run on a continuous cycle. That type of Shabbat lift is pretty much the same as any other lift getting into any other lift that you might be able to get into. Whether you can or you can't, right? And again, we've seen different opinions. There are Shabbat lifts specifically made by Tomet and the Halakha Institute that build the lifts, that actually built to be fully Shabbat compatible, which means that the way they work is no matter what weight is placed into the lift, the functionality of the lift will work the same way regardless. So it's not done in a traditional way as lifts are made. It's done in a way that Shabbat can be a Shabbat-friendly way. So based on all of this, if someone says, "Can I use a lift on Shabbat?" I say it's not simple, right? Because there are lots of different opinions. There is what to rely on, by the way. Don't get me wrong. There is what to rely on. But personally, I don't use lifts on Shabbat, and I don't use Shabbat lifts on Shabbat unless I know they have a hefsher. Literally, they have, you buy your chickens from this place and you get your lifts in that place, and it's simple as that, right? And if you know that it's come from a decent place, you could use it. I did see a tshuva that said you should never ever look down or disgrace someone that uses them, because we have plenty to rely on as long as all using and functionality of the Shabbat lift or the lift is done in a way that circumvents any problems, i.e. pushing buttons or getting someone to do it for you. But one should be mindful that it's definitely a problem asking someone to press a button for you, because that is, might as well just ask them to, turn your lights on. Same problem. But essentially, I think these are the issues around it. Have I been fired? I'm not telling you not to use them, by the way. There are many interesting ways of building these lifts, and I said that you've got what to rely on. You've definitely got what to rely on. The mainstream mind-turning opinion does follow the one of Halpern, which means it's definitely much more problematic to go down than it is up. Which means if you wanted to be quite firm about it but still use it, you could just go all the way to the top and then walk down to where you need to be. Market of Shabbat activities. We had the privilege of staying in Bournemouth a couple of years ago on the 12th floor, and there was no lift. Oh no, there was a lift. We didn't use it. That was fun. The kids had fun. We had fun. Fun to do in the day, but not always practical, which I appreciate. So when there's a need, one should understand how it works and understand how to make it work. But yes, any questions? No.
It's kosher.
So how do you know if the lift has got a hesher or not?
It's a very, very good question. So the only way of doing it, I imagine, is looking at the model and the number and speaking to the company and find out, is it set to work that, you've just got to find out how that one's being set. Right. As we say, it needs investigating if you want to investigate it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I mean.
Right.
Again, I'm happy to talk more about specific examples, but essentially, you'd need to, I'm sure on the side of the letter it has the company, the brand, the model. You need to find out. Say, just you're interested to know. There are many venues around Israel, on restaurants and this that I've wanted to go. I lived in Israel for we lived in Israel for nearly 7 years. I was the kashrut mashgiach in my yeshiva, and I know far too much, unfortunately, about kashrut and the politics behind kashrut of food in Israel to make your hair stand and like horror stories about, and which is why I'm pretty strict about where I will and won't eat in Israel. It's much simpler in England. Less variety, but it's much simpler in England to keep kosher, genuinely. If you really want to find me, ask me to do a share on kashrut in Israel. you
Well, we had the experience with Joshua when he was in yeshiva. He had only eaten certain restaurants, and they were always the most expensive ones.
I can give you some really cheap, really horrible ones. But the nicer ones.
No,
Yeah,
but so coming back to lifts, would it be, say, for instance, newer blocks would more likely to have lifts that are suitable rather than older blocks? Or
I think the only way you're going to have a decent Shabbat lift, when I say decent, I mean one that's following all of these, if it's been a kavana, like with full intention, because you're in a somewhat religious neighborhood or area that people care about these things, that they've ensured that that type of lift is being put in. It's not like, it's a little bit like, I think it's a little bit like that you can get a Shabbat mode on an oven, which is a bit of a cheeky thing, because again, I'm not an expert in this. My understanding is a Shabbat mode in an oven doesn't do anything. Meaning, you can't use an oven on Shabbat. You can't put food in an oven on Shabbat. There is no halakhic authority that says on Shabbat, when Shabbat is in, I'm not talking about before Shabbat, I'm talking about on Shabbat morning, even if the oven's on, Yom Tov you can, on Shabbat you can't. So my understanding is the Shabbat mode is a switch in the oven that you can put on before Shabbat, which means it circumvents the safety cutout on modern ovens. So modern ovens have a safety cutout. So if you leave the oven on, after 12 hours, 24 hours, whatever it is, the oven will just go off. So the Shabbat mode circumvents that cutoff. So that's why it's called Shabbat. So you can leave your oven on. If you leave food in your oven before Shabbat comes in, you don't want to eat it till Shabbat afternoon. That's perfectly fine. If you want to leave your oven on, or if it's Yom Tov on Motzei Shabbat and you want to leave your oven on, that's fine. But you can never ever put food in an oven on Shabbat. So setting an oven is a Shabbat mode. If I leave my oven on 120 degrees or 110 degrees, I've turned it into a hot cupboard. Which is fine for putting food in, but I still can't put food in. It's fine putting food in or taking food out before Shabbat, but I still can't put. So that's what I'm saying. So you've got to be a bit, unfortunately, a bit in the game to know. Which is why I thought it was an interesting topic, which is I know bits, but I didn't know it as
what about if you've got? I don't know if they have them, but if you had a time switch on an oven, certainly you can have a time switch on a hot plate, so that the hot plate is cold, and you put something on the hot plate, or a hostess trolley type thing, so that it comes on, let's say, an hour before Shabbat, so the food doesn't spoil if it's left in there the whole of Shabbat.
You can put food on a hot plate, and you can put food in a hostess.
So, but if it's the thing's
Even
on
cold,
a time switch.
Yeah. I put my hostess on a time switch every week.
Okay, so yeah.
In fact, not so much at the moment, but I used to sometimes put the food in the hot plate before the hot plate even came on, or the hostess, on Shabbat morning, because if I went to shul really early, or even if it's on, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. There's a specific decree because they are with ovens. Hot
So
plates,
in other words, if you had an oven on a hot plate, an oven on a time switch, so it was cold, you wanted to come on 2 hours, you couldn't do that.
Still a problem. It's because it's an oven. There's this particular. It's called Mechzika Mavasha, right? And it's a little bit like I think it was Barbara said at the beginning about the lift Maris Ayin looking like you're doing something wrong. The Chazal made a specific decree when it came to Shabbat, when it came to ovens. He says if you put food in an oven on Shabbat, ovens are used for one thing, cooking. Hot plates are used for warming or keeping food warm. Ovens are used for cooking. So even if you've set your oven to keep warm, by putting food in an oven on Shabbat, it looks like you're cooking. So they said no putting any food in an oven on Shabbat.
But you can put things on a blech. So
yeah, but a blech doesn't look like cooking. You've got a metal sheet there.
Yeah, but you've got, let's say, you know, it's almost the same as an electric cooker or sort of a convection type cooker, where you've got heat coming underneath the pan.
But that wasn't in the decree. The decree was on for ovens. I hear what you're saying, but they made the Gezerah up. So who are we? They are much wiser than me. And it could be that today they would do something different. But the Rabbanim of the time said, Mexican Mavashal. It looks like cooking, and you can't do it because other people won't understand.
Okay.
Okay. But that's Arthur, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right.
It's sort of basically what you're saying is. If you put it in an oven, it looks like cooking. If you do it in anything else, it doesn't. So it's okay if you do it properly.
Again, it depends what okay means, but just to be clear, it's a specific thing with ovens, not food in an oven. A blech, which is a metal sheet that you put over your burner, your hob, your gas hob, isn't cooking. Okay, if you put it under? There are those that say with a blech that you shouldn't put food directly under the hottest burner because that is like cooking. But again, getting more nuanced and complicated, but it wasn't in the decree of not putting it in an oven because it's a
because
blech.
you can put things on a part of a hot plate where it'll come on and it'll essentially boil.
Okay, so
well, make a
good question. It's a different share. It's a different share. I'll tell you why it's a different share, because there are many, not all, many Ashkenazic authorities will tell you should still not put something directly on a hot plate. Right, so we don't. Right, it's called hefsek kedera. It's called an upside down or kedera panik, an empty pot. So if I want to put a kugel on a hot plate, for example, on Shabbat, I need to put another dish down on the hot plate and then put the food on top of the dish. So you put a full pot or an oven tray, whatever it might be. Why? Because it's also Mexican because it looks like cooking. I would argue humbly, and there are one out there today that would say you can't cook on a hot plate. I've never tried, but I'm pretty sure I can't find egg on a hot plate. But the Israeli hot plates are dangerous. You can do a lot.
Don't go to Phoenix then, because you can actually cook when it's a hot day on the bonnet of your car or on the sidewalk. So you can cook an egg on a hot plate. It might take a bit longer, but you could.
Do you know? But just I'm only skipping away from that because that's a whole shit. I think I did this a couple of years ago actually on a Shabbat afternoon. But yeah, Anthony, sorry, yes, lifts.
Sorry, I noticed today in Divrei Kodesh they sell a contraption called a Shabbos kettle, which actually looks like a kettle. Is that? But I'm not quite understanding how. Would that not be problematic because you have to take it, lift it off, and then put it back on again?
I saw it as in from a distance, but I haven't actually looked into what it is. So I saw Shabbos kettle because that's what they call the Shabbos urn, right? Shabbos kettle. But yeah, it doesn't actually look like a kettle, right? Yeah. So I don't know how it works. I don't know. I need to look into how it works. But I'm assuming it's okay. But it looks wrong.
Divrei Kodesh. It wouldn't be in Divrei Kodesh.
Well, you don't know. Right? So
no. I've seen it advertised, but I don't know what it is. I haven't looked into it properly. Take a picture and send it to me next time we're there.
Yeah, I'm not. I just stick to the urn.
Any other questions based on what we discussed? I hope you found this very uplifting. I've descended into nothingness. Okay, it's silly nonsense, right?
Well, I feel elevated, so.
Ouch.
There you go. I'm trying to think of another one. I can't. Melinda, you're on mute. I'm quite excited.
Yes, we bought this back from Israel. We had one in Israel, and I'm trying to remember. It has a keep warm function. So
I want to see it. That's why.
Oh, I see. You want to see it?
This is a Shabbos kettle.
It's a Shabbos kettle. We had one in Israel and we brought it back to England, but we've never used it.
Is anyone else excited?
We thought it would be something useful for the two of us, for whenever the two of us. And also we drink far more than a kettle.
I think your camera's off, Melinda.
No, it's on. I can see.
It's on. I've seemed to have got larger.
Can you lift it up a bit, Melinda?
What?
Can you lift it up a bit, please?
Yeah, I'm going
We
to
can't-
that.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
If Russell can remember how, it's like a normal kettle. And
Oh, so you can
goes
use
on
it as a
base-
normal kettle?
It's like a normal kettle. It goes on a base. But what you do is you boil it up before Shabbat, and then you put it into Shabbat mode. So you've got a button that you press, and it just basically keeps the water hot, a bit like an urn.
Is it on a base?
Yes, it's on an electric base.
So how does that, when you lift it off, does it?
Russell, can you come and explain this to me? No, I know. Sorry. My apologies. Football's taken over tonight. I just need you to come and explain the Shabbat kettle.
Tell them it's 0-0.
Are they? I don't know. Where are
This is
you?
watching Germany, Denmark. And that's not 0-0. No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't know. Is there anything that looks like a hechsher on it? I'd be interested to know.
Rabbi, we're talking about Shabbat kettles because Anthony saw one in Divrei Kodesh and I went to get ours.
Yep.
But can you explain how it works?
Yes.
Good evening, Russell.
Well, explain.
All right. There's a setting on the top here.
But you boil it up before
You,
Shabbat.
you boil it up before Shabbat, and then you press that button, and that sets it so that it acts just like a Shabbat kettle,
But you take it on and off.
but you can take it on and off and pour out from it.
But when you put it back, aren't you reconnecting the circuit?
No,
Why?
But why not? Because
Why not?
something in there has got to be keeping it. It's got to be connected.
there will be a detector so that it only reconnects with the electricity at certain times. Though it's regulated by Summit, and there will be a connector within the mechanism that tests for the electricity and only connects it when the thing is back on it and has been there for a while. It's not like you put it back on.
That makes sense. If we go back to our share, if you remember Grummer, we talked about the burning the guy in this desert, right? So, or the water, the pails of water with a fire. So it's not a direct cause. So I'm assuming, based on what Russell's saying, is that when you put it back on the base, the assumption is you're not automatically reconnecting the circuit at that point, and that there will be at some point an indirect, it will just reconnect on its own. It must be like on a little time lapse thing. And therefore it's called Grummer, and therefore, according to some opinions, then that's okay.
I think it's the same technology as these mobility scooters use.
Yeah. Which again, not everyone will use, but definitely some rely on.
Yeah.
Summit's an interesting one because what they do is fascinating, but like anything Jewish, not everyone accepts them. Someone asked me from our shore recently
Yeah, you can go back.
and I said you did. Thank you, Russell. Enjoy the football.
My apologies.
It's complicated because we bought it back from Israel. It's all in Ivrit.
Luckily, you've got a son as a rabbi.
Wow, I haven't shown it. I mean, we've had this back here for a long time. I don't
I was about to
know.
say, you haven't recently been to Israel.
No, I don't know whether or not he would use it, to be honest. But there's a Shiloh for him.
I feel very bad. Russell just missed a goal.
Oh
You
no.
just missed it.
I just picked up on it's 1-0 to England in the last 2 minutes. You can't make it up.
No, don't worry.
I've learned a lot new. I reckon it's grammar. I reckon why how they made that. Anyone got any other questions? Thanks for that, Melinda. And fascinating. There you go. We've learned. We've gone from lifts to kettles, but it's all part of the same issue. So there you go. If no one else has any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and make sure my kids haven't killed each other.
Thank you very much indeed, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank
There's
you.
no
Thank
shit
you.
next week, 'cause on
Thank
Wednesday
you very
night,
much.
there's a leadership
Thank you,
symposium,
Rabbi.
Barbara, we've got that thing. But the week
Sorry?
after,
Oh,
next
right.
Wednesday is a leadership thing, and I've also got I'm a bit packed next week. The week after is Miri's year 6 graduation, but I'm going to give them up this year. It's a different night. Just there's a calendar that went out with the email. Check the calendar. There's a lot of Wednesday clashes, so I'm going to try and make them up on different nights. So we try and keep.
It's a Thursday night, isn't there?
Yeah, I think there's next week it's Thursday, and I think the week after I'm doing a Tuesday. I'm doing some Q&As as well. Just watch out for the emails and.
Yeah.
Back and busy and great. Any questions or if you've got any topics you want me to cover, then let me know and I'm happy to try and think about looking at them. Okay, have a lovely rest of the
Thank
evening.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Lila Tom.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody.
Lila,
Bye.